It is 11 p.m., and you are tuned once again to the frequency that keeps the night alive. Tonight, Night Shift Radio opens a different kind of broadcast. Welcome to the Midnight Sleep broadcast, a quieter transmission of atmospheric stories, distant oceans, wartime mysteries, and voices carried gently through the dark. So dim the lights, settle in, and allow the Atlantic to carry you away. Tonight's story is Blackout on the Atlantic. And before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Please don't forget to support the channel through the Buy Me a Coffee link below. Every coffee helps keep the broadcast alive. Blackout on the Atlantic. The RMS Aldermore departed Liverpool on the 3rd of November, 1942, in the company of fog and the low moaning of an autumn wind that had crossed the Irish Sea with nothing kind to say. She was a vessel of 11,000 tons, converted from her pre-war life as a luxury liner into something leaner and more purposeful. Her staterooms stripped of their gilded mirrors and velvet upholstery, her ballroom partitioned into dormitories, her swimming pool drained and used for cargo. She carried on this particular crossing 263 passengers, 141 crew, and approximately 47 secrets of varying degrees of consequence. She was bound for New York, a crossing of 6 days if the North Atlantic cooperated, which it rarely did in November. The convoy she was meant to join had been delayed by weather off the Hebrides, and so the Aldermore made her departure alone, relying on her speed, 22 knots at full power, and the prayers of those aboard her, which were in ample supply. Among those prayers belonged to a man who stood at the stern rail as the lights of Liverpool disappeared into the murk, his gloved hands resting lightly on the cold iron, his posture entirely still in the manner of a man accustomed to waiting. He was neither young nor old, somewhere in the difficult country between 45 and 55, where precise age becomes a matter of interpretation. His face was angular and precise, with dark eyes that moved with the careful economy of a man who had learned that the best way to see everything was to appear to be looking at nothing in particular. He wore a charcoal overcoat that had been expensive once and was still respectable, and a dark gray scarf wound twice around his throat. His name, according to the passenger manifest, was Mr. Emile Cavour, and he was listed as a Belgian national traveling in a private capacity. This was not entirely untrue. He watched Liverpool dissolve into the November darkness and felt, as he always felt at the start of a crossing, the particular quality of loneliness that the sea produced. Not the aching loneliness of grief or separation, but the cleaner loneliness of a man suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He had crossed the Atlantic 4 times since the war began. Each time, the ocean seemed less like water and more like a held breath. He turned from the rail and made his way inside, moving through the blackout curtain at the stern entrance with the practiced ease of long familiarity. The corridors of the Aldermore were lit by dim blue safety lamps that gave every face the quality of a photograph taken underwater. He passed a group of American servicewomen in uniform, a pair of elderly gentlemen arguing in low, urgent voices about Roosevelt, a child of perhaps 8, who stared at him with the unsettling directness that children reserved for those they could not categorize. Cavour inclined his head to the child and continued on. He found the first-class lounge in a state of cautious sociability. The room contained 2 low tables surrounded by leather chairs, a bar at which a barman of impressive solemnity dispensed watered whiskey, and a gramophone in the corner currently producing, with some crackle, a Benny Goodman recording that seemed at odds with the general wartime atmosphere. Cavour took a chair near the window. The porthole was covered by its blackout blind, but old habit, and ordered a cognac that arrived as something cognac adjacent, the real article having long since become a casualty of the war as surely as any soldier. He sat and he watched, which was, when it came to it, how he spent most of his time. There were perhaps a dozen people in the lounge. He catalogued them with the unhurried attention of a man who had learned at considerable cost that first impressions were almost always wrong. At the bar sat 2 men in conversation, both in the dark blue of the Royal Navy. The commander was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with the red-veined face of a man who had spent considerable time in cold winds. Commander Hugh Ashworth, returning to New York from a meeting at the Admiralty he described, when pressed, as administrative. His companion, Lieutenant Peter Hallowell, drank his whiskey quickly and ordered another with an ease that suggested this was not a new development in his biography. Near the gramophone sat a woman of perhaps 35, reading with complete absorption a book whose cover she had removed, a practice Cavour had always found interesting in travelers. She was handsome rather than beautiful, with strong cheekbones and hair that had been dark and was now doing something complicated in the direction of gray. She wore no jewelry except a plain gold band on her right hand, which was not where English women traditionally wore wedding rings. Her name was Miss Frances Devereux. She held a French passport and had presented herself at embarkation as a journalist for a Geneva-based press agency Cavour had never heard of, which was itself interesting. At the table nearest the door, a man in his late 60s sat with a glass of water and a posture of exhaustion so complete it seemed to emanate from him in waves. Dr. Joseph Kleiman, a physician, or had been, in Vienna. His suit was Austrian, the cut of a Viennese tailor. There was a quality to his stillness that was not the stillness of peace, but of a man who had used up his capacity for agitation and arrived at exhausted equilibrium. The leather medical bag on his knee never left his side. His hands, even at rest, trembled slightly. 2 more figures occupied the farther table. The first was a tall Englishman in his mid-40s with a diplomat's careful face, the kind trained over decades to express precisely nothing while conveying, by the finest gradations of emphasis, exactly what it wished to. Mr. Gerald Whitmore, attached to the Foreign Office in some capacity. He described differently each time it came up. His companion, Mrs. Elena Vasos, was dark-complexioned, with the compressed energy of someone who had learned to be entirely quiet at the moments that mattered. She was his secretary, he said, though she had not brought a stenography pad. Cavour sipped his not-quite cognac and thought, as he always thought in the first hours of a crossing, that the sea was the world's best trap. No one could leave. No one could be summoned. For 6 days, whatever was already aboard the ship was all there was. And whatever happened in those 6 days happened in complete isolation from the rest of a world that was itself at the moment, consuming itself with considerable enthusiasm. He was in this reflective state when a young man sat down opposite him without invitation. The young man was perhaps 28, with the sort of open English face that is sometimes mistaken for stupidity and is sometimes actually stupidity. He had fair hair, a recent haircut, and the eyes of someone paying more attention than he appeared to be. He wore civilian clothes, but sat with a military straightness that the civilian clothes could not quite domesticate. "You'll be Mr. Cavour?" the young man said. It was not a question. "I am," Cavour agreed. "Thomas Leeming. I'm traveling to New York on government business." He said this in the tone of someone who knows the phrase, tells you nothing, and intends it to tell you nothing. "Many people are," Cavour said pleasantly. Leeming smiled. It was a young smile, a little stiff. "I was told to look you up by a mutual acquaintance, a man called Hartley." "Ah." Cavour set down his glass. "Then you are the young man they sent to keep an eye on things." "Something like that. What does the government wish you to keep an eye on, Mr. Leeming?" The young man glanced once around the room, the glance made casual with practice. "There is reason to believe that someone aboard this ship is carrying information. Documents, possibly. Something the Abwehr would very much like to get their hands on. And the reason to believe this is above my pay grade, I'm afraid." Cavour looked at him for a moment. "Tell me, do you play chess?" Leeming blinked. "Passably. There is a chess set in the corner. We will play occasionally. It provides a legitimate reason for sustained conversation without intimacy." He picked up his glass. "One other thing. The man Hartley sent on the last crossing was found in the harbor at Southampton with a broken neck. I mention this not to alarm you, but so that you approach your work with appropriate seriousness." Leeming was quiet for a moment. "They said it was an accident." "They generally do," Cavour said, and returned to his not quite cognac with the serene expression of a man who has said everything necessary and is content to let the silence do the rest. The first day passed without incident, which on a wartime crossing meant only that the incident had not yet announced itself. Cavour spent the morning walking the ship's promenade deck, 3 times in each direction, in the cold and the spray. In the afternoon, he sat in the lounge and read. In the evening, he dined at the first-class table, where the captain had arranged the seating with the traditional maritime instinct for combustibility. Captain Forster was 60, compact, with a Commodore's insignia, and the expression of a man who has stopped being surprised by anything the sea or its passengers might produce at the table. Cavour, Commander Ashworth, Miss Devereux, Gerald Whitmore, and a man Cavour had not yet encountered, Mr. Andrew Schaefer, an American citizen returning home after what he described as some business in London. He was perhaps 40, well-built, with an American easiness of manner and a Harvard tie that may or may not have been honestly earned. Terrible business, all this, Schaefer said, gesturing vaguely at the blackout blinds. Sailing in the dark. What are the Germans doing out here exactly? Sinking ships, Commander Ashworth said, with a brevity that discouraged follow-up questions. Miss Devereux looked up from her plate. Were you in London long, Mr. Schaefer? 3 weeks. Business meetings, the kind you don't talk about over dinner. He smiled, self-aware enough that it might have been genuine. There is a great deal that one doesn't talk about over dinner these days, Whitmore said, in a tone so smoothly neutral it was almost like no tone at all. That must make for quiet dinners, Schaefer said. On the contrary, Whitmore replied, silence is remarkably loud once you've learned to listen to it. After dinner, Cavour smoked a cigarette on the promenade deck, standing in the complete darkness of the blackout, with only the stars above and the ocean's black heave below, and thought about the question of information. Someone carried something. Someone else knew this. The geography of this problem was constrained. 6 days. A ship that could not run. The second day brought rain. It came in off the northwest in heavy gray curtains that swept the deck and reduced visibility to something measured in yards rather than miles. Cavour played chess with Leeming, winning both games easily, which was not the point. The point was 25 minutes of legitimate conversation. Tell me what you know about the other passengers, Cavour said, moving his bishop. Commander Ashworth is returning from the Admiralty, as he says. I verified that much. Leeming considered the board. Miss Devereux is more interesting. Her press credentials are real, but the agency she works for has a Zurich address that 3 separate people have looked into and come away from with different answers. She speaks 7 languages, Cavour said, without looking up. She was reading a Hungarian novel last night, and she laughed at a passage on page 44. It was a joke that only works in Hungarian. Take the bishop. It's a trap. Leeming looked at the board, looked at Cavour, and took the bishop. Whitmore? Foreign Office, senior grade, Paris before the fall. Then Lisbon. Mrs. Vassos, his secretary, has a background in signals intelligence. Her husband was killed in Athens in 41. And Mr. Schaefer? OSS, Leeming said quietly, then seemed to reconsider and looked around the lounge. The nearest other occupant was Dr. Kleiman, 20 feet away, apparently asleep. At least that's the assumption. He has State Department papers, but the OSS has been operating under state cover since spring. Dr. Kleiman, his story checks out. Distinguished surgeon in Vienna, lost his position in 38, got out through Switzerland. Red Cross papers, all verified. Leeming paused. The Red Cross contact that arranged his travel. I tried to verify her, and the name doesn't appear in any Red Cross register I could find. There's one more, Leeming said. The radio operator, a man named Croft. He came up on our list because he had an unusual career before the war. Worked in merchant shipping, then a period he can't satisfactorily account for, then back to the merchant marine. People with periods they cannot satisfactorily account for are either people with shameful pasts or people with secret ones, Cavour said. In wartime, the latter is rather more likely. He sat back. Have you heard of a man called the Sparrow? Leeming went very still in a way that confirmed the answer before he spoke. An Abwehr asset, an intelligence conduit, someone who doesn't collect information but moves it, receives material from agents on one side, passes it to handlers on the other, and is thought to be operating on the Atlantic route. That's the concern. Cavour nodded. I would like to meet the radio operator Croft, but in a way that seems accidental. Can you arrange that? He began resetting the chess pieces. And Mr. Leeming, please be more careful tonight. I believe you've been followed. Brown suit, thinning hair. He is, I suspect, one of ours, or one of theirs, or possibly a very attentive reader. The world is full of possibilities. The encounter with Croft was arranged for the following morning through the prosaic mechanism of a request for a radio message. Cavour had, in fact, a genuine message he wished dispatched to a contact in New York, and so the meeting had the satisfying quality of a deception that required no deception at all. The radio room was a small, warm, oil-smelling space tucked behind the bridge, filled with the insect-like chatter of Morse code and the blue glow of instrument panels. Croft was a compact man of perhaps 40, with close-cropped gray hair and hands that moved over his equipment with the unthinking confidence of long practice. He had a quality of abstraction, as though his attention was perpetually focused on something just slightly beyond the immediate conversation. He took Cavour's message without expression, read it, and looked up. This will go through the Naval relay, sir. Might take a few hours. That's quite all right. Cavour looked at the equipment with the politely curious expression of a civilian. Extraordinary, isn't it, that you can sit here in the middle of the ocean and speak to New York? Not speak exactly. Croft's voice was flat. Home counties, carefully ordinary. Transmit. It's one way at a time. More like shouting into a very long tube and hoping someone's listening. And is someone always listening? Croft looked at him. The look lasted a fraction of a second longer than necessary. The Americans have a relay station on Long Island. They monitor our frequencies. And the Germans monitor as well, I imagine. Everyone listens to everyone, sir. That's the nature of radio. He began transcribing the message. As Cavour turned to leave, Croft spoke again, without looking up. You'll want to watch the weather tonight, sir. There's a front coming in from the northwest. The captain may call a blackout drill. It was a simple observation, the kind of thing a radio operator might reasonably say. Cavour paused. Thank you, he said. I'll bear that in mind. He descended from the radio room and stood for a moment in the corridor outside, listening to the deep hum of the ship's machinery. He thought about the message he had handed Croft. It had contained, not incidentally, a specific sequence of words, a prearranged test phrase used by his service to identify certain kinds of reactions. Croft had reacted to nothing, which was either because he was innocent or because he was very good. Very good was, in Cavour's experience, the more dangerous possibility. He found Miss Devereux in the reading room that afternoon. She did not look up when he entered, but when he settled into the other deep chair, she said, without taking her eyes from the page, "You've been watching me since Liverpool, Mr. Cavour." "I watch everyone," he said pleasantly. "That is either modesty or deflection, and you don't strike me as a modest man." She turned a page. "What is it you want to know? What brings you to New York?" "I've told everyone what brings me to New York." "You have told everyone a version of what brings you to New York." Cavour agreed. "Which is not quite the same thing." She looked up then. Her eyes were gray, the particular gray of winter sea, with something in them that was not cold, but careful. "My employer does not appear in the registries because my employer prefers not to appear in registries. The work I do is genuine. The channels through which I transmit it are simply more selective than a standard press agency." "You work for an intelligence service," Cavour said. She considered whether to deny this and decided against it. "I work for people who care about certain kinds of information. That is all I am prepared to say." Allied the ghost of a smile. "I should think that would be obvious. What information do you carry?" The smile disappeared. "What makes you think I carry anything?" "Everyone on this ship carries something," Cavour said. "The question is simply what, and whether any of us know what the others have." She set the book in her lap. For a moment, the rain against the porthole was very loud. "You believe there is a conduit aboard?" "I believe there may be someone who collects what others carry and passes it on, or who arranges for it to be collected before it can reach New York." He looked at her steadily. "I am telling you this because I think you are capable of being careful, and because your capabilities may be useful to me. Be careful with your documents. Keep your cabin locked, and if you find yourself in conversation with someone who asks questions that are too precisely specific, questions that could only be useful if they already knew something, they shouldn't. Tell me immediately." She nodded with the clipped efficiency of someone who had been briefed many times and knew how to receive information. "One more thing," Cavour said at the door. "The book you were reading yesterday, without the cover. If I am not mistaken, it was a Hungarian novel by Carinthi Frigyes. The edition with the blue cloth binding." A silence. Then, "You read Hungarian?" "I read most things," he said, and left. The front came in that evening as Croft had predicted. By 8 o'clock, the Aldermore was moving through seas that ran at 12 feet and rising, the horizon abolished by cloud, the darkness around the ship absolute and vast. The first-class lounge retained perhaps half its usual complement, most of them speaking in the low voices of people who did not trust the ship's motion not to throw their words at unexpected volume. Cavour was at the bar when he was joined by Andrew Schaefer, who lowered himself onto the adjacent stool with the cheerful steadiness of a man who either lacked imagination or had too much of it. "Hell of a night," Schaefer said. "On the contrary," Cavour said, "the night is entirely peaceful. It is the sea that is agitated." Schaefer laughed. A genuine laugh, the kind that starts in the chest rather than the throat. They drank in companionable silence for a moment before Schaefer said, with a studied casualness that was not quite casual enough, "Tell me about the other passengers, Whitmore and his secretary. Are they actually what they say they are?" "Mr. Whitmore is certainly Foreign Office," Cavour said. "Whether he is only that is another question." "Why do you ask?" Schaefer turned his glass on the bar. "I had a meeting in London. As part of that meeting, I was shown a list of names. People, we were told, might be carrying sensitive materials on this crossing." He said it with a frankness that was itself a decision. The decision to partially lower his guard. Whitmore's name was on the list as a potential threat. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because I'm told you're trustworthy by people whose judgment I respect." He finished his bourbon. "I figure we're both on the same side. And given the situation, the sea, the blackout, 6 days, it seems better to know which way the guns are pointing before someone fires them." It was, Cavour thought, either a very clever piece of disinformation or a genuine and somewhat reckless act of professional candor. He filed both possibilities. "I appreciate the confidence," he said. "Let me say this. I am watching several things on this crossing. I believe something will happen before we reach New York. When it does take shape, I would value someone who can move quickly and isn't afraid of consequences." He met Schaefer's eyes. "Are you that person?" Schaefer was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. Not the wide, easy smile of before, but something quieter and more precise. "I've been told I'm that person." "Yes." "Then we understand each other." The ship heaved, longer this time, a sustained rolling that redistributed the drinks on the bar. And at that moment, very clearly above the storm and the engine note and all the various sounds of a distressed ship on a distressed sea, the klaxon sounded. Not the U-boat alarm, not that precise, escalating shriek Cavour had heard twice before and hoped never to hear again. This was the blackout drill alarm. 2 short blasts, 1 long, all lights to be extinguished, all passengers to their cabins. Cavour set down his whiskey and moved at once, with the unhurried precision of a man who had rehearsed this. The emergency lighting came down to its red minimum. The lounge fell into a bloody dimness. He was almost at the corridor when he passed Dr. Kleiman, standing with the blinking confusion of someone recently awakened by a noise they hadn't processed. Cavour took his elbow and walked the old man to his cabin, 41, 3 doors from his own, waited while he unlocked the door. watched him go in, heard the bolt slide. Then he walked to his own cabin, sat on the bed in the red darkness, listened to the storm, waited. It took 22 minutes by his count for the drill to end and the lights to come back. The sea ran heavy against the hull. The engines maintained their note. Somewhere above him, feet moved on the deck. He was at his door with his hand on the latch when he heard the scream. It came from down the corridor, high and short, and immediately cut off. Not the sustained cry of someone who has slipped, but the abrupt, shocked sound of someone who has encountered something they did not expect and whose body has reacted before their mind could instruct it to be quiet. Cavour was in the corridor in the next instant, moving quickly toward the sound. He found her outside cabin 39, Mrs. Vassos, Gerald Whitmore's secretary. She stood with one hand pressed flat against the corridor wall and the other at her mouth, her eyes fixed on the door of cabin 39, which stood open by perhaps 8 inches, the room beyond it dark. "What happened?" Cavour said, his voice quiet and entirely steady. She looked at him. Her composure was returning with visible effort. He could see her rebuilding it, layer by layer. "I was passing," she said. The door was open. I looked in, and, "Mr. Renwick," she said, "I think he is dead." Cavour pushed the door open. Cabin 39 was a standard first-class single, a bunk on the left wall, a writing desk beneath the porthole, a small wardrobe. The porthole was blackout blind closed. On the floor between the desk and the bunk, on his back with his arms at his sides, in the attitude of a man who has been tidily arranged, lay a man Cavour had seen at dinner, but had not yet had occasion to formally meet. The name in the passenger manifest was Mr. Douglas Renwick, traveling in a private capacity. Profession listed as merchant. He was perhaps 50, of medium build, with a face now entirely without expression in the most absolute possible sense. There was a livid bruise around his throat, and his eyes were open, and his color was wrong. He had been dead, Cavour estimated, between 1 and 2 hours. He had been strangled by someone who knew what they were doing, and then turned onto his back and left with his arms at his sides. The arrangement of the arms was not the natural result of strangulation. Someone had placed them there. Cavour stood in the doorway and looked at the dead man for a long moment. He did not enter the cabin. He did not touch anything. He simply looked with the complete concentrated attention of a man who knows that this moment, before others have been here, before things have been moved, is the only moment of perfect information. On the desk, a half-written letter, the ink not fully dry, a glass of water, barely touched. His coat hung on the wardrobe door, a good overcoat, camel hair, pre-war. His cabin key was on the desk beside the letter. The porthole blind was down. The door had a latch lock, the kind that engaged automatically when the door was pulled shut, requiring a key to open from the outside. But it had been open when Mrs. Vassos passed it. 8 inches of gap. Cavour stepped back into the corridor. Did you touch anything? No. Her voice was steady now. Impressive. How long between the klaxon ending and your passing this door? 4 or 5 minutes, perhaps. Were you in your cabin during the drill? Yes. Did you hear anything before you came into the corridor? She met his eyes. No, nothing. He studied her face for a moment. Stay here. Don't let anyone into this cabin, and don't touch that door. He was already moving. I need to speak to the captain. Captain Forster received the news in his day cabin off the bridge with the expression of a man who had been anticipating bad news for some time and is mildly annoyed to find it has arrived in this particular form. Murder, he said, when Cavour finished. It was not a question, certainly. The bruising is manual strangulation. There was no struggle, at least none visible. The cabin was essentially undisturbed. The body was positioned after death during the blackout drill. The drill began at 8:43. It lasted 22 minutes. Death occurred 1 to 2 hours before I found the body at approximately 9:20. That gives us a window from approximately 7 to 8:40 before the drill, possibly, or in the very first minutes of it, before the emergency lighting established. There was a period of perhaps a minute and a half between the klaxon sounding and the emergency lighting coming fully on, in complete darkness, with all hands and passengers moving, with the storm providing considerable noise cover. He left the implication in the air. Forster was quiet. The bridge sounds came through the closed door. We cannot stop, Forster said finally. We cannot divert. We cannot radio for assistance without breaking silence, and breaking radio silence in these waters would alert every U-boat within 40 miles, Cavour finished. I know. I am not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Cavour leaned forward slightly. I am asking for your complete confidence and your complete authority as captain of this vessel. I need to speak to every first-class passenger and certain members of your crew. I need access to passenger records, cabin assignments, the complete manifest. I need this done quietly and quickly, before whoever killed Renwick has time to arrange their narrative. Forster looked at him with the assessing patience of a man who has given authority to others in emergencies before. You have done this sort of thing before. Yes, I was a magistrate in Ghent before the war. Since then, I have, on several occasions, been asked to look into matters that conventional investigation could not address. By whom? By people whose names you would know if I were authorized to give them. Another silence. The ship rolled slightly. Very well, Forster said. You have what you need. But Mr. Cavour, discretion. I have 263 passengers on this ship. We are in the middle of the North Atlantic in November 1942. The last thing I need is a panic. Discretion is my primary instrument, Cavour said, and meant it. He began with the half-written letter. It was addressed to no one. Begun, my dear, and then stopped, as though the writer had reconsidered who the dear in question was. The handwriting was controlled and even. It read, My dear, I am writing this because I find I cannot sleep, and because I have been thinking about what was said at our last meeting, and I have come to the conclusion that I was wrong, not about the substance of the matter. About that I remain entirely certain, but about the method, and I should have said so at the time. If you receive this, and there it stopped. Cavour stood at the desk and looked at it for a long time. Then he carefully, with gloved hands, moved the letter aside. Beneath it was a notebook, small, leather-covered, the kind that could be slipped into a breast pocket. He opened it. It was written in a cipher, not a simple substitution. Something more systematic, a letter number combination that moved in patterns he could not immediately parse. The notebook was perhaps a third full. The most recent entry was longer than the others. He did not remove the notebook. He committed as much of it as he could to memory. The cipher structure, the length of the most recent entry, what appeared to be a set of numbers near the end that might be coordinates, and replaced it where he had found it. Then he looked again at the room. The wardrobe contained 3 suits and an overcoat. In the pockets of the suits, he found a handkerchief, a small leather wallet containing 12 pounds and 60 American dollars, and a carte de visite for a firm of London solicitors. A folded sheet of paper he opened and found to be a list of names. He read the list twice. Then he refolded it and replaced it. Under the mattress, nothing. In the bathroom, nothing of note, except a silver-backed brush and a vial of a strong German sedative, the kind prescribed for anxiety. The label from a Zurich pharmacy. He stood for a moment in the bathroom doorway, thinking about the German sedative. Then he returned to the body. He knelt beside it. The hands first. No marks, except the faint callus of a habitual pen user on the right forefinger. No defensive marks, which meant either that death had come quickly or from behind, and there had been no time to raise the hands. The throat. The bruising was bilateral, finger marks on both sides, the placement suggesting someone of average hand size. The position of the thumbs would have been anterior, someone facing the victim, not from behind. He had looked into the man's eyes and not been afraid, or had been afraid and concealed it. Either way, Renwick had looked at the person who killed him. He stood and went to the door, stepped into the corridor, and locked the cabin with the master key the first officer had given him. Douglas Renwick, merchant, private capacity. The list of names, the cipher notebook, the German sedative, the half-written letter, the arrangement of the arms, the door that had been standing open. He found the ship's doctor at 2 a.m, roused from his cabin by a knock that the doctor answered with the resigned alertness of a man accustomed to being roused at 2 a.m. Dr. Martin Bryce was 52, lean, Scottish, with the economy of movement and speech that came from 30 years of shipboard practice. In the corridor outside cabin 39, he said, simply, Let me see him. He knelt beside the body with a clinical attentiveness that moved with swift efficiency. Throat, hands, pupils, lividity, temperature. After 4 minutes, he stood. Strangulation. Call it 7 to 9 in the evening, given the skin temperature and the lividity pattern. He didn't struggle much, either completely surprised or he hesitated, or he was sedated, Cavour said. Bryce looked at him. What makes you say that? There is a vial of sedative in his bathroom. Temazepam, from a Zurich pharmacy. You prescribed it to him? A pause. I prescribed him something for anxiety. 2 days out of Liverpool, he came to me unable to sleep and in a state of considerable agitation. Bryce's expression changed, not dramatically, but in the way of a man who is reassessing something. If he'd taken more than the prescribed dose, even an hour before, he would have been drowsy, slow to react, possibly. Bryce was quiet for a moment. He came to me agitated. He didn't say why. He said, and I thought nothing of it at the time. He said he was worried about arriving in New York. He said, I'm not certain I'll arrive. And then he seemed embarrassed by it and didn't say anything else. I thought he meant the crossing, the U-boats. Everyone's afraid of that. He may have meant something else, Cavour said finally. Yes, Bryce said. I rather think he may have. He interviewed them one by one the following morning in the captain's private dining room. He conducted each interview in the same manner. A pot of tea, 2 chairs positioned at angles rather than opposite each other. A conversational opening that had nothing to do with the matter at hand. He was interested always in the moment of first reaction, not what people said, but the infinitesimal delay before they said it, the decision that occurred in that space. Commander Ashworth came first. He was as Cavour expected, composed, direct, mildly impatient. He had known Renwick slightly. During the Blackout drill, he had been in his cabin. He had heard nothing unusual. He was about to be dismissed when he added, unprompted, You should speak to Halliwell. My lieutenant was on the promenade deck during the drill. He has trouble with enclosed spaces, and I've given him a standing dispensation. He might have seen something. Lieutenant Halliwell confirmed this. He had been on the promenade deck during the drill, standing in the complete darkness near the stern railing. And did you see anything? Halliwell's eyes moved, not dramatically. A small directed flicker. The deck was dark, but not entirely, eventually. The emergency lighting, some of the blue lamps, are exterior. The promenade deck would have had minimal blue lighting, enough to see shapes. A beat. I saw someone on the deck, a figure, moving quickly, away from me, toward the bow. They went through the door to the interior corridor quite fast. I couldn't see much. Dark coat, not very tall. Before the klaxon, or after? During, perhaps 5 minutes in. And this figure came from which direction? Halliwell frowned. From amidships, the area near the lifeboats. The area, Cavour noted, directly above cabin 39. You knew Renwick, Cavour said, without inflection. The beat this time was slightly longer. I'd seen him around the ship. I may have crossed paths with him before. In a professional context? Intelligence work, Cavour said. That's not a term I'd use. No, but it's accurate. Cavour looked at him with the calm attention that was, he had found over the years, more unsettling than any aggressive interrogation. Was Douglas Renwick an agent of your service? A long pause. Then, with the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy and is finally permitted to set it down. He was an agent, not mine. He didn't answer to the same people I answer to, but we were both on this ship for the same reason. He had a document. I don't know what it contained. I was told it was important enough that its safe arrival in New York was worth 2 independent protective details. He stopped. I was told there were 3 of us watching him. Himself, me, and whoever Hartley sent. How did you know Hartley sent someone? I didn't know for certain, but Hartley always sends someone. The document that Renwick was carrying. Where would he have kept it? On his person if he was sensible, or hidden in his cabin. I found a cipher notebook in his cabin. Could that have been it? Halliwell frowned. A cipher notebook is a working document. The document I was told about was described as a physical object. Papers possibly. Possibly on film. Cavour stood. One more thing. The person on the promenade deck. Shorter than you? Halliwell thought. About my height, perhaps. 5'9". And you said dark coat. Could it have been a woman's coat? Shorter than a man's overcoat? Something moved in Halliwell's face. Possibly, he said. Possibly, yes. He saw Miss Devereux after lunch. She came to the small dining room with the unhurried assurance of a woman who has been interviewed by people who mattered and knows how to control the temperature of such a conversation. She sat down, folded her hands, and waited. Tell me about Douglas Renwick, Cavour said. Not a flicker. I've never spoken to him. But you know the name. I've seen him at dinner. The name is on the passenger list. Cavour looked at her. She looked back. Miss Devereux, he said. Douglas Renwick was carrying something of significant intelligence value. He was killed for it. The object is no longer in his cabin, which means either that it was on his person, in which case his killer has it, or that it was hidden somewhere else on the ship. She was entirely still. I also know, Cavour continued, that the person who killed him is someone Renwick allowed into his cabin and met face to face. Someone he knew, someone he trusted or believed he could manage. Why does that narrow it? Because trust is specific. We trust people who remind us of safety, or who arrange to be in the right position to receive our trust. He paused. Renwick came to the ship's doctor 2 days out of Liverpool in a state of anxiety. Not fear of U-boats, the doctor now thinks. Fear of something more specific. He knew he was being followed, or that someone aboard was not who they appeared to be. He looked at her carefully. Did you bring anything on this crossing that someone else might want? A long pause. I carry information, she said finally, in my head. Not a physical object, but what I know, what I've collected over the past 6 months in Europe. Yes, there are people who would very much prefer that I not arrive in New York with that. You were on the promenade deck during the drill. She was entirely still. What makes you think that? You were not in your cabin. I knocked quietly to check on you. You did not answer. Another silence. I went for air, she said. I went to the promenade deck. Who did you see? A fractional pause. I passed Dr. Kleiman in the corridor, going toward the promenade deck. He appeared to be going the same direction. I went forward. He went aft. And you saw nothing, and no one on the deck itself? Nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. One more question. The Hungarian novel. Did you lend it to anyone aboard? The question was unexpected enough that her composure shifted fractionally for the first time. No, why would I? No reason, he said. Thank you, Miss Devereaux. Gerald Whitmore came in. The afternoon. He wore his pinstripe suit and his diplomat's face, and sat with his hands on his knee, and regarded Cavour with the calm assessment of a man who is very accustomed to being assessed in return. I have been wondering, he said, before Cavour could speak, how long it would be before this conversation happened. You knew Renwick? I knew of him. We worked adjacent to each other, let us say. He uncrossed and recrossed his legs. I was at the Paris embassy before the fall, then Lisbon. What I observed during those 3 years, and how I have interpreted it, and the conclusions I have drawn. Those things live here. He touched his temple, and I am carrying them to New York because there are certain conversations that cannot be conducted by cable or wireless, and certain people who need to hear them from a person rather than from a piece of paper. And if someone knew that, they would very much wish to prevent me arriving. Whitmore said, Yes, I have been aware of that possibility for some time. Cavour looked at him steadily. Did Renwick know what you carry in your head? A pause. Renwick knew I was important. Whether he knew the specifics is harder to say. His work and mine overlapped in certain operational areas. One more thing, Cavour said. I am going to recite 7 names. I would like you to react naturally, without considering how your reaction might be interpreted. Whitmore straightened very slightly. Cavour recited the names from memory. There were 7 of them. He watched Whitmore's face as he said each one. On the 6th name, something happened. Not much. A tightening around the eyes, a fractional stiffening. But it was there. That name, Cavour said. You recognize it. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then, if the name on that list is the name I think it is a name that has appeared in my analysis before as the possible identity of the Sparrow. The room went very still. I was not certain, Whitmore said. I am not certain now. A name on a list is not proof, but a name on a dead man's list, Cavour said, is information. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his cabin with the lights off and the porthole blind up, and thought about what he had and what he was missing. What he had, Renwick, dead, strangled by someone he allowed to face him in his own cabin, a cipher notebook, a working document, a list of names in the dead man's coat pocket, one of which Whitmore connected to the Sparrow, a figure on the promenade deck, dark-coated, not very tall, moving quickly, a half-written letter to someone unnamed, a German sedative from a Zurich pharmacy. The item Renwick was carrying, the physical document, was not in the cabin. It was either on the killer or somewhere else on the ship. What he was missing, the item itself, and the connection, why Renwick had opened his door. He was not killed from behind. He was facing his killer. He knew them, or believed he could manage them. He let them close enough to be strangled without time to cry out. Who do you let that close? Someone you know well, someone with authority, someone who has engineered an intimacy that feels real but is constructed. He thought about the Sparrow, not a collector, not an agent, but a conduit, someone who knew the architecture, someone who had been inside it for long enough to know which names opened which doors, the perfect instrument for the Atlantic route, back and forth, Liverpool to New York, a different face each time. He thought about the sixth name on Renwick's list, the name Whitmore had reacted to. A woman's name he had assumed, because the sixth entry on a list written in cipher had a certain length and shape. But cipher is not language, and assumptions on this crossing were instruments of misdirection. He thought about Miss Devereux and about the construction he had been building around her, and about a description he had overheard Devereux herself giving to Schaefer that evening in the lounge. He had stood at the gramophone, apparently reading the record label, and had heard, just barely above the music, their conversation. Told me in Paris, Devereux was saying, that the entire network had been compromised. This was in '39, just before the fall. You trusted the source? Schaefer's voice, easy, attentive. I trusted the source at the time. Later, I had reason to reconsider. The source was wrong, or the source was what the source was, she said, with a precision that closed that line of inquiry. What matters is that the people who were named in it were killed. 2 of them in March of '40, 1 in July. The 4th, I don't know. She disappeared. She. Yes, I had met her in Bern in '38. She was remarkable, the kind of person who was so... She stopped. She had the gift of becoming exactly what a given situation required. Whatever a room needed, she was that, not performing it, actually being it, for the duration needed. I thought, at the time, that it was the most dangerous gift I had ever observed in a person. What was her name? Her name at the time was Martha Seiler, Devereux said. Whether that was her real name, I was never certain. Cavour sat with this in the dark, the gift of becoming exactly what a given situation required. Not a collector, not an information gatherer, but a conduit. Someone who moved through the architecture of an intelligence operation like water through pipes, taking the shape of whatever vessel received her. A person who had been in intelligence before the war and had apparently been compromised. Or apparently killed, and who was therefore, by definition, someone who no longer existed in the official registers, a name that could not be found. He had been building his construction around Miss Devereaux, letting the burn woman's description shape his assumptions. But Devereaux was the one who had given him that description. Devereaux was the one who had met Marta Seiler and said she was remarkable. Devereaux was the one whose account he could not independently verify. The gift of becoming exactly what a given situation required. And in this situation, in this lounge, what had been required was a woman with gray eyes and a French passport and 7 languages and a past just opaque enough to be interesting. Someone who would attract Cavour's attention and hold it while the real operation proceeded elsewhere. But that was still a construction, still an assumption. He lay in the dark for a long time more. Then he got up, dressed, and sat in the chair by the porthole and waited for morning. He spent the next day in a state of surface normality, walking the deck and reading and speaking pleasantly at luncheon about the improved weather. All the while, beneath this surface, he was moving through what he knew with the methodical patience of a man who has learned that solutions do not arrive through brilliance, but through persistence. He kept returning to the cipher notebook. Professional cipher, systematic, reproducible, someone trained in cryptography. And the notebook was Renwick's own working document, which meant Renwick himself had cryptographic training, or had learned a cipher from someone who did. He was turning this thought over for the 3rd time when he passed the radio room and heard, through the partially open door, something that stopped him. Not Morse code, something different, a pattern he had heard before, 20 years ago, in a different war, a pattern that the man who had taught it to him had called the whisper, a very low-power signal shaped to look like atmospheric interference, carrying encoded information in its gaps rather than its pulses, almost impossible to identify unless you were looking for it. He stood outside the door for perhaps 5 seconds, long enough to establish the pattern, long enough to establish that it stopped the moment the operator became aware of him in the doorway. Then he knocked, stepped in, and found Croft at the board, headphones around his neck, expression entirely composed. "Mr. Cavour, your message to New York arrived last night. I was going to send word." "Thank you," Cavour said pleasantly. He looked at the board. Any traffic of note? Standard convoy communications. Weather relay from Iceland. Croft's hands rested on the board, quite still. "Nothing unusual." "Good," Cavour said. "I won't disturb you." He left and walked to the bow and stood in the cold sea air. The whisper, a signal technique used by German naval intelligence for covert ship-to-shore communication, used by agents aboard vessels communicating their position and contents to shore stations or U-boat command. And Croft was the radio operator. But that was only what it appeared to be. he arranged, through the first officer Hughes, a quiet examination of the passenger radio transmitter, the small public unit through which passengers could send paid messages. The examination took 15 minutes and confirmed what he suspected. The passenger transmitter had been modified, subtly, almost invisibly, the work of someone who knew the equipment. But the modification was there, a coil adjustment that would, under certain circumstances, allow a signal to be produced on a frequency outside the civilian range, the range specifically of the whisper. Someone had modified the passenger transmitter, not Croft, whose access to the naval radio made this unnecessary. Someone else, someone who had access to the communications room and the knowledge to make such a modification, but who was not the ship's radio operator. He stood and looked at the modified transmitter and thought about all the people on this ship and all their capabilities. Signals, intelligence, experience, technical training, operational sophistication. Any of them might qualify. But the modification was recent, and the communications room required a specific access code to enter after midnight. He went to find Dr. Kleiman. He found the old doctor in the reading room, sitting with his medical bag on his knees and his hands folded over it, and his eyes fixed on some middle distance that was not the room. Cavour sat in the adjacent chair. Neither spoke for a moment. "You know why I am here," Cavour said finally. Kleiman looked at him. His face had a quality of transparent exhaustion, not a face that was hiding anything, but a face from which concealment had become too expensive to maintain. "Yes," he said. "Tell me about the Red Cross contact who arranged your travel." "Her name, the name I was given was Helene Brandt. I know that the name does not appear in the Red Cross registers. I made inquiries myself 6 weeks ago. The name is false. Who arranged your passage then?" Kleiman looked at his hands. The tremor was more pronounced today. "I received a letter in Manchester. It told me that my passage to New York had been arranged through certain channels, and that there was a task I was being asked to perform during the crossing." He reached into the medical bag and, without looking, produced a flat package approximately the size of a book, sealed with brown paper tape. He held it out to Cavour. "You haven't opened it," Cavour said. "No, I was told not to. I was given it by a man on the quay at Liverpool. I had never seen him before." "And what did you understand this to mean?" The old doctor looked at him with eyes that were exhausted but entirely clear. "I understood it to mean that I was being used, that the package contained something that had nothing to do with medical research, and that I, an old man with legitimate papers, legitimate grief, was the ideal courier, someone no one would look twice at." He paused. "I kept it because I did not know what else to do, and because I was afraid." Cavour reached out and took the package. It was lighter than he expected, slightly flexible. Microfilm, possibly, or very thin paper. He turned it over. On the back, almost invisible, a small mark, a dot inside a circle, made in pencil so light it was barely there. A recognition signal. the Sparrow's mark on a package that the Sparrow intended to collect. "Dr. Kleiman," he said, "I am going to ask you to do something that may feel dangerous, but I believe it is the safest course." The old man looked at him steadily. "Ask. Keep the package. Return it to your bag. Say nothing to anyone. Act entirely as you have been acting." Cavour met his eyes. "When someone comes to you, if someone comes to you, and makes reference to the package, tell me immediately. You believe they will come?" "I believe," Cavour said, "that we have perhaps 36 hours before we reach New York, and that the Sparrow knows it as well as I do." He found Leeming at breakfast and outlined the plan in low, precise terms. Leeming listened with a focused attention that had replaced his earlier nervousness. "Tell me what you know about Renwick's documents," Cavour said quietly. "Not what they said, what they physically were." "I was told there was a report." Leeming checked the room. They were in the far corner, the nearest occupied table, a comfortable distance away. Something compiled over 18 months by a network operating in occupied France and the Low Countries. Identities, Abwehr assets in Allied services, people who had been turned, names, a list of names, a comprehensive one, the kind that, in the wrong hands, would end careers and lives. And Renwick compiled it? He was the courier. Someone else compiled it. Hartley referred to this person as the cartographer, someone who had been mapping the German intelligence network from the inside, someone extraordinarily well-placed since before the war. Cavour thought about what it meant to be extraordinarily well-placed for years, to have built a map slowly, name by name, of the German intelligence apparatus operating against the Allies and the corresponding danger. Because if such a map existed, the Germans would know about it, because they had their own people in Allied services. "The list in Renwick's pocket," Cavour said. "Was that the document?" Leeming's expression told him before he spoke. No, the document was much more extensive. The list, 7 names. That would be a small part, a fragment that someone tore from the whole after Renwick was dead. The killer went through his things and found the document and took it. But they left the list in the coat pocket, Leeming finished, because the coat was hanging on the wardrobe door, and they were searching the obvious places. The coat pocket was less obvious, or they ran out of time, which means the document is now with someone on this ship, unless, Cavour paused, unless it has already been disposed of. Disposed of? The Sparrow is a conduit. Their function is to move intelligence from one place to another. If they killed Renwick for the document, their intention is to have it delivered. In New York, there will be a German handler waiting. Leeming had gone very still. Then we need to find it before we dock. Yes, and we need to find it before the Sparrow knows how close we are. Because when they know, they'll do what they did to Renwick, Leeming said. They will do what is necessary, Cavour said. They always do. The drill was called at 9 in the evening, the 5th night of the crossing. The klaxon sounded. two short, one long. The lights went to red minimum. The corridors emptied. In cabin 39, empty now, the body of Douglas Renwick having been moved to a more appropriate location. Cavour sat in the dark, not alone, with Schaefer on one side of the door and Leeming on the other, both in the corridor, both armed, both with orders to wait for Cavour's signal. In cabin 41, Dr. Kleiman sat with his medical bag on his lap and the lights off and the door locked from the inside, and waited. The plan was simple. If someone came to Kleiman's cabin, they would knock with the specific sequence Cavour had found repeated in the cipher notebook. A possible entry signal, a recognition pattern. Two slow, one fast. If the Sparrow knew the notebook, they would know the knock. Kleiman would open the door. The emergency lighting settled to blue, somewhere distant. The engine maintained its note. Cavour sat in the dark and breathed slowly and listened. 3 minutes. 5. The sounds of a ship in calm weather at night. The gentle working of the hull. The ventilation fans. The ocean's breathing. 7 minutes in, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Unhurried, measured. Not someone running, not someone sneaking, but someone walking with the purposeful quiet of a person who knows where they are going and has decided to go there with confidence rather than concealment. The most dangerous kind of movement, the kind that looks like it belongs. The footsteps stopped outside cabin 41. 2 slow knocks. One fast, a pause. The sound of the bolt being drawn. A door opening. Voices, low, too low to parse. He eased the door of cabin 39 open a half-inch, very slowly, and from this angle he could see the open door of 41 and the 2 figures, one inside and one in the doorway. Then he stepped into the corridor and said, quite calmly, "Good evening." The figure turned. Mrs. Elena Vassos stood in the doorway of cabin 41 with one hand on the doorframe and her face in the blue emergency light, entirely composed. She was not carrying anything. Behind him, he heard Leeming and Schaefer moving into the corridor. "You came for the package," Cavour said. She looked at him. "The package is mine," she said, and her voice was steady and clear. They sat in the captain's private dining room. Cavour, Vassos, Forster, Schaefer, and Whitmore, who had been roused from his cabin and arrived with the expression of a man who has been preparing for this conversation for some time and is, beneath his dismay, almost relieved it has arrived. The package sat on the table between them, unopened. "Tell me," Cavour said to Vassos. She looked at the package, then at Whitmore, who was very still, his diplomat's face performing an act of extraordinary control. "The package was not Renwick's," she said. "It was mine. I gave it to Kleiman in Liverpool to carry because I believed, correctly, that I might be searched. I judged that my own effects would be examined. Dr. Kleiman was not a person anyone would search. He is an old man with medical papers and a refugee's history. You arranged his passage. Yes, through a channel that was available to me. And the package contains what? She looked at him steadily. My own records, my own intelligence. 3 years of work, names, contacts, safe house addresses, communication protocols, material I have been building since I arrived in England, material that needs to reach the right people in New York. Allied material, Cavour said. Completely allied material. My husband was killed. My network was destroyed. Everything I have done since is directed toward the defeat of the people who did that. She paused. I am not the sparrow. No, Cavour agreed. You're not. A silence. Whitmore exhaled quietly. But, Cavour said, you were connected to the person I believe to be the sparrow. The knock. 2 slow, 1 fast. Where did you learn that signal? A fractional pause. I was told by the man who arranged Kleiman's passage, the man who handed Kleiman the package on the quay at Liverpool, that if the package was disturbed, there was a signal I could use to recover it. And that man's name. He called himself Hartley. The room went very quiet. Cavour sat with this for exactly 5 seconds. Then, describe him. She described him. 50, medium build, graying hair, good London suit, a slight Midlands accent softened by education. The description matched no one aboard the ship. It also matched no one Cavour had ever associated with the name Hartley. The Hartley he knew, the Hartley who had sent Leeming, was a young man, early 30s, worked out of an office in St. James's. Someone had used that name, had used it deliberately, knowing it carried enough weight in certain circles to ensure compliance, knowing it would not be immediately questioned. Someone who knew the intelligence world's internal architecture well enough to use its names as instruments. Thank you, Mrs. Vassos, Cavour said. The package is yours. You are not the person I am looking for. He stood. I apologize for the circumstances. She looked at him. Not with warmth exactly, but with a kind of professional respect. Who are you looking for? Someone who was hiding in the light, Cavour said, which is the hardest place to hide and the easiest to stay, because no one looks there. He went to find Leeming. I need you to tell me something, and I need the truth, he said quietly. The man Hartley sent on the last crossing, the one found in the harbor at Southampton with a broken neck. Yes. What was his name? His name was Croft, Leeming said. Michael Croft. The emergency lighting clicked off. The normal lights came back. The drill was over. Cavour stood very still in the corridor. The radio operator, he said. I didn't know he was on this ship, Leeming said quickly. I swear to you, when you told me about Croft, I assumed it was a coincidence of name. It is not a coincidence, Cavour said. The man in the radio room is not the man who died in Southampton. He is using the same name, the same credentials, the same professional history, which is why a background check would find a real man with a real record. The real Croft is dead. This Croft is someone else, someone who acquired Croft's identity, had his credentials forged, and took his position on this crossing. He was already moving, and do not go to the radio room under any circumstances. Stay in the main corridor. If you hear anything, send word to the captain. What are you going to do? I am going to have a conversation, Cavour said. A very careful one. He had been wrong, he thought, as he climbed toward the radio room. Not about everything. About the list. About Rennick. About the structure of it. But about the identity. He had seen a woman in the lounge with a book without its cover, and he had let his mind build a construction around her because she was interesting, and because a good construction was seductive. He had heard Devereaux describe a woman named Marta Seiler, and he had placed Miss Devereaux's description into his construction because it fit, and it had fit too well, which should have told him something. Real answers were always slightly uncomfortable fits. The thing you were looking for never matched the space you had prepared for it exactly. When something fit perfectly, it was because someone had shaped it to fit. He thought about Croft saying, "You'll want to watch the weather tonight, sir. There's a front coming in from the northwest," said the morning of the drill, said in a way that placed the drill in Cavour's mind as anticipated, as expected, as part of the natural order of the evening, and therefore less remarkable when it happened. Said to make him think about the weather, not about who had known there would be a drill. The captain had not announced the drill until 2 hours before it sounded, but someone had known it was coming. Someone who had access to the captain's communications, who monitored weather frequencies as well as naval traffic, who was positioned perfectly to observe and transmit every piece of intelligence that moved through this ship. The modification to the passenger transmitter, the whisper signal, the way every piece of information seemed to flow through the radio room as naturally as electricity through wire. He reached the radio room. The door was open. Inside, the instruments blinked and muttered. The chair was empty. The headphones hung on their hook. Croft was gone. He found him. The man who called himself Croft on the promenade deck. He was standing at the stern rail in the place where Cavour had stood on the first evening, looking back over the ship's wake, and he turned when he heard the door open with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has been waiting and is not surprised. Cavour stopped 10 feet from him. They stood in the night air, the ocean black and vast around them, the stars clear and cold. "You've worked it out," Croft said, not the flat home county's voice from the radio room, a different voice. Accented, Central European, with the kind of careful English overlay that came from decades of practice and training. "Mostly," Cavour said. The man who was not Croft was perhaps 45, compact, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that was genuinely ordinary. Not handsome, not remarkable, not anything that would catch the attention across a room or fix in the memory. A face designed, as it were, for disappearance. "The real Croft," Cavour said. "You didn't kill him." A fractional pause. "No, he died in Southampton. You acquired his papers after. These things are arranged, the man said, with the tone of someone describing a technical process. His papers were available. I needed a position on this crossing. You've made this crossing before. Many times, different positions, different identities. Yes, the stars were very bright. The ship's wake spread behind them in a pale phosphorescent line. Renwick identified you, Cavour said. Not from the radio room. You were careful there. But somewhere before this crossing, he saw you once in Lisbon, and on this crossing, he sent a message through the public transmitter. A message you were able to read because of the modification. The message contained enough for you to know that he'd identified you. He wanted to negotiate, the man said, something in his voice. Not contempt, exactly, but the acknowledgement of a mistake. He believed that the information he carried gave him leverage. He was wrong. The document, Cavour said. The cartographer's list. Where is it? In New York, the man said. It went off the ship on the first night. Cavour was very still. How? The modification to the transmitter was not only for receiving high-density signal compression. Everything a camera can capture, a modified transmitter can send. He paused. The document is already with its destination. The physical object is at the bottom of the Atlantic. Cavour absorbed this. Then Renwick died for a document that was already lost. He died because he knew too much and would have reported what he knew. The man's voice was entirely uninflected. I regret it, if that matters to you. He was a capable man. What matters to me is what happens now. The man looked at him. You are going to arrest me. I am going to ensure that you are in the captain's custody until we reach New York, where you will be transferred to people who are significantly less polite than I am. Cavour looked at him steadily. The question is whether this requires difficulty. A silence. The ocean around them was immense and cold and indifferent. The document is already transmitted, the man said. Arresting me changes nothing in that regard. No, Cavour agreed. But you know things. You are, and I suspect you have been for a very long time, in a position of extraordinary access to the architecture of two opposing intelligence services. What you know, properly extracted, is worth considerably more than what Renwick was carrying. He paused. And I suspect you know this. I suspect you have known for some time that a day like this would eventually come. And I suspect you have prepared for it. Something moved in the man's face, not the neutrality of a moment ago. Something more complicated. You're offering me something, he said. I am observing that people with your particular value tend to arrive at a different kind of conversation than ordinary criminal proceedings. I'm not authorized to offer anything, but I can ensure that the right conversations happen with the right people. He paused. One provided that the remaining hours of this crossing are entirely uneventful. Another silence. The stars moved imperceptibly. The ship moved through the darkness. Renwick's list, the man said slowly. The names he had collected. The sixth name. Yes, it wasn't mine. He looked at Cavour with something that was, very precisely, the first honest expression Cavour had seen from him. He had identified a different asset, someone in Allied services, someone who is not me and is not aboard this ship. He paused. Someone who is considerably more dangerous than I am. Cavour was still. If I am given the right conversations, the man said, I can give you that name. The real name, the correct one. He paused. Would that be worth something? That, Cavour said carefully, would be worth a very great deal. He spent the last night of the crossing awake, but with a different quality of sleeplessness. Not the vigilant alertness of a man hunting something, but the slower, more thoughtful wakefulness of a man processing what he had found. The document was gone. He had failed in that specific and particular way. The cartographer's list, 18 months of work by a network he had never met, names that had cost people their lives to obtain, was already in German hands, and he could not change that. Renwick was dead. He had not prevented that either. What he had was a man in the captain's custody who carried in his head information about a real Abwehr asset in Allied services. Someone who was not the Sparrow, who was something worse, embedded somewhere with access to the kind of material that made Renwick's document look modest by comparison. It was not nothing. It was a great deal more than nothing, but it sat beside the failures with the uncomfortable weight of partial success, which he had always found harder to live with than outright failure. He thought about Miss Devereux, who was not Marta Seiler, and about the construction he had built around her and then had to dismantle. She was what she appeared to be, an operative carrying valuable information in her head who had been doing so for years, moving through Europe's collapsing certainties with 7 languages and a gold ring on the wrong finger, and a loyalty that had cost her things he had not asked her to specify. He thought about Dr. Kleiman, asleep in cabin 41, with his trembling hands and his medical bag and his exhaustion that was decades old. What it meant to be used as an instrument by everyone, by the war, by the intelligence services, by the man who had given him a package on a quay in Liverpool and told him it was medical research. He thought about Vassos and her dead husband and what she carried in that package and what it would cost her to give it to the right people in New York, and whether it would be enough and whether anything was ever enough. He thought about Leeming, who was young and had conducted himself on this crossing with more steadiness than Cavour had expected, and who would, he thought, be better at this than most people, given time. He thought about the man in the captain's custody, whose name he still did not know, who had been the Sparrow for what appeared to be a very long time, who had moved through the Atlantic like a ghost ship, carrying other people's secrets from one world to another, visible and invisible, real and not real, until a dead man's list had caught him at last. Caught him but not stopped him, because the information in his head was the new currency, the thing that would determine his future. The sea does that, Cavour thought. It changes what things mean. Out here, the ordinary measures of land, property, law, nationality, the physical boundaries of rooms and cities dissolved into something simpler and more absolute. What mattered out here was what people carried inside themselves and what they were willing to do with it. He was still thinking about this when the porthole lightened from black to gray, and then from gray to a pale and watery dawn, and the coast of America announced itself, not as a line on the horizon, but as a smell. Wood smoke, though that was impossible, the distance being what it was. And then as a quality of light, warmer and somehow more substantial than the ocean's light. And then, finally, as a dark, and then a darker, and then a real and solid horizon. New York. He dressed and went to the promenade deck and stood at the rail as the city came toward them through the morning haze. The harbor opened. The towers rose behind their mist-like declarations. The Statue of Liberty turned her back on the approaching vessel with the serene indifference of a monument that has seen everything and long since stopped being moved by it. Around him, the passengers emerged from their 6 days of ocean and isolation with the dazed, blinking relief of people returning to the world, carrying their secrets and their suitcases and their various reasons for being here. He watched them from the rail, Leeming with his brown tweed jacket and his trainee's walk, Whitmore with his diplomatic case and the weight of his Lisbon years, Mrs. Vassos with her package and her grief that was also a weapon, Devereaux with her 7 languages and her Hungarian novel, Dr. Kleiman, last to emerge, standing at the rail with his medical bag and looking at the towers with an expression beyond what Cavour could easily name. Not hope, not wonder, but the particular quality of a person who has lived long enough in extremity that the merely enormous is sufficient. Schaefer appeared at Cavour's shoulder. "Hell of a crossing," he said. "Indeed. We'll debrief in the city. There are people who want to hear what you have. There are people who will want to hear considerably more than I have," Cavour said, thinking of the man in the captain's custody. "But what I have will be a beginning." Schaefer looked at him. "You think the man will talk?" "He's already talking," Cavour said. "He talked last night. He will talk more. He has been carrying things for other people for a very long time. And I think, though I would not say this to him, that he is tired of it." He looked at the approaching towers. People tire of carrying things, even people who are very good at it. What will they do with him? "That is not my area," Cavour said. "My area ends at the dock." Schaefer was quiet for a moment. "And the document? The cartographer's list?" "Gone," Cavour said simply. "The names on it. Those assets will need to be burned quickly before the Germans act on the information." He paused. "It is a significant loss, but not a total one." "No," Cavour agreed. not a total one. He reached into his pocket and produced, folded carefully, the list from Renwick's coat, the 7 names, the fragment that had escaped, because someone had searched the obvious places and not the coat. 7 names, he said, and the 6th name, which will lead us to someone considerably more dangerous than the sparrow. He held the paper for a moment, feeling its weight, which was entirely ordinary and entirely out of proportion to what it contained. That at least we have. The ship moved through the harbor. Tugs came alongside, small and purposeful. The city revealed itself by degrees, towers, and water, and the sheer improbable human ambition of it. All of it happening at an ordinary morning's pace, indifferent to the 6 days of ocean and secret and violence that had preceded this arrival. He folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. Somewhere below, in the captain's custody, the man who was not Croft sat with his secrets and his calculation and his years of careful, dangerous, invisible work, and waited to begin the next negotiation. Somewhere in a New York office, a German handler waited for a message that confirmed the delivery of information that was already, in ways neither of them yet knew, compromised. Somewhere in Lisbon, or Paris, or London, or the shadow spaces between these cities, the person whose name was on the 6th line of Renwick's list continued to work, unaware that the list had survived, that a fragment of it had made it across the Atlantic in a dead man's coat pocket, that a Belgian of uncertain capacity named Emile Cavour was now standing at the rail of the RMS Aldermore as it entered New York Harbor with that fragment in his jacket, unaware, and therefore still moving, still operational, still dangerous. Cavour looked at the city and felt the familiar cold clarity that he had felt at the beginning of every investigation. Not the cold clarity of the ocean's beginning, but the colder, cleaner clarity of the end, when what lay ahead was no longer the question of what had happened, but the harder, longer, less dramatic work of what came next. A man was dead. A document was lost. A spy was caught. And somewhere, the real work was waiting. He took out a cigarette, lit it with the practiced ease of a man who has smoked on many decks in many weathers, and looked at America with the steady, patient, slightly melancholy attention of a man who has just ended one thing and is already thinking about the next. The gangplank would be down in an hour. He was not done yet. He was, perhaps, only beginning